presented. Right? But it's interesting, search engine, your search histories tell a lot. There was the infamous release by AOL in 2006 of 500,000 search engine users' search histories over a sort of 3 to 6 month period. Were extremely revealing, very personal, your search history. How else to study engines? It's interesting. What we do is we don't take a user approach, but rather we take more of a kind of what Bruno described as a web epistemological approach. We study the results of queries. And it's tricky business because it's against Google's terms of service, for example, to save search engine results. It's also against Google's terms of service to repurpose stored engine results. That is, create visualizations thereof, etc. And I'm going to show you a bunch of them in the next few slides, but I wanted to just say that at the outset. What we do is we put up a notice on these projects requesting Google's forbearance, and that is how we deal with this issue. Search engines are epistemological machines because they create orders, as I said before, hierarchies, rankings. So the question is, which sites rank and which do not for particular issues? It is a very basic information politics to ask what sites have won the competition to provide the information for a particular query result. And when you think about issues such as human rights or what have you, which sites have won the competition? Now, I started this particular work, it was in 2003, when I put a query into Google for terrorism. And sort of interesting query, terrorism. You don't get terrorism back, if you will. In other words, you don't get sort of sites self-identifying themselves as terrorist sites, but you wouldn't expect that. But it's an interesting little issue. So, like, okay, so who then is defining what terrorism is? Well, when I looked at it, I was like, interesting. The top site, FBI.gov, Federal Bureau of Investigation, CIA.gov, Central Intelligence Agency, WhiteHouse.gov, the Heritage Foundation, a sort of right-of-center think tank in the US. These kind of sources in the top 10. At 18 was CNN, I think 19 was Al Jazeera. I think there was one strategic studies website in the top 20. Yeah? So it's interesting which sites are actually the sites that are in some sense winning the competition to be the sources for particular information. Yeah? So this is how I study search engines. Now, what I do is I capture and save the results. What you see before you is a graph showing the page rank of 3 different sites for the results of the query 9/11. In red is a site, it's 911truth.org, what is oftentimes described as a conspiracy website. In green is nyc.gov, that's the New York City government website, and in blue is the New York Times, nytimes.com. You see how 911truth.org is in the top 5, really high ranking. So they're winning the competition. You see that both the New York Times and New York City government are, if you will, buried. So they're at a ranking over 50, and the other one is over 100. Now, in doing this kind of work, we actually discovered something. Before you is, I think, and I've looked into this a lot, and I can't find another example, the first fully documented case of the apparent removal of a website, by Google in its engine returns. You see on September the 17th approximately, this is 2007, you see the red one, the line, it drops precipitously to result 200, and then it drops below 1,000. Now 1,000 is the maximum number of sites or pages that is delivered or served by a search engine. You don't get more than 1,000. So when you see, there used to be these quips in internet research, you made a query and it says there are 75 million websites, and then researchers would ask, well, it would take me more than a lifetime, or how long would it take me to go through 75 million sites? There are only 1,000 that are served. In any case, what you see here is what one could think of as not the stability of search engine results, but the volatility. So it opens up a new area of inquiry into how stable are these results. If you go to Google and you query something on one day, are you going to get the same results the next day? Well, in this particular case, for a 9/11 query, that wasn't the case. And so we have collected quite a few search engine results, and I'll have an answer to the question another time, whether they're stable or rather volatile. How else to study the engines? What we have done is we have built a particular tool. It's called the Google Scraper, also known as the Lippmannian device, and it's a tool that sits on top of Google. And what it does is it utilizes Google search engine capabilities in order to determine whether or not a source is partisan. You can use the word biased, but it's more partisan. Right? So it allows you to figure out which side a source is on. Which side is it on? Another way of putting it in a far more subtle language is it looks into the level of commitment of a particular organization to a particular issue. What you see before you is is a particular depiction that you might need some time to get used to. It is in the form of a tag cloud, but it's a host cloud, if you will. You see on you see about 100 hosts, and the one on the top left is epa.gov, and that's followed by bbc.co.uk, followed by DEFRA, followed by UNEP, etc. Yeah? Those sites are the top 100 sites for a query of climate change, yeah? In that order. Now what we've done is we've left the sites in that order on this depiction, and we've left them in that order, and then we queried each of the sites individually for the names of climate change skeptics, the individual names of the skeptics. So do the top sources on the web, according to Google, dealing with climate change, do they mention the skeptics? Now it's interesting because if you do news analysis, what you'll find is that the skeptics are quite close to the top of the news. In other words, skepticism is something that's mentioned quite often, because in news there's an idea that one needs to have both sides of the story. Now the question I was initially asking is, how close are the skeptics to the top of the web? What you see here is that they're not very close to the top. The top sites on the web for a query of climate change do not mention the skeptics by name. Now, I have not subsequently done the research, or I'm not going to go into the research about whether or not, whether we also would like to use the word skepticism, uncertainty, other words, yeah, to see whether or not these particular top climate change sources are in the uncertainty debate, if you will, or at least taking it on, acknowledging that it exists. But rather, I'm showing you, first and foremost, a technique. Now, the larger the size of the hosts, the more times the host has the skeptic mentioned on its website. So you see in a snapshot immediately who's talking about the skeptics. Now, previously I talked about that you could tell an actor's partisanship, and then I complicated that notion by saying you can see an actor's commitment to a particular issue. Because you see here that Marshall.org, which we then looked into, is a funder of the skeptics. Real Climate is something they're in the real They're in the real discourse.